Hi, this is a video that I found and had a look at this morning from Mark Dolan's at GB News. And he's talking about a book which has been a launch, which you can see just there in the screenshot, Welcome to Sex, and it's aimed at 8-year-olds nonetheless. I just wanted to go through this because some of the things that he's saying are in the book, and he does show some screenshots, are just a little bit concerning. So let's have a listen.
Small children. Let me give you a little detail on this book. But before we do that, can I just say that if there are children 13 or younger listening or watching now, maybe now's a good moment to send them out of the room. This show is always family friendly and they'll be welcome back in 5 minutes' time. But it's important that you know about this shameful tome. It's being described as a no silly questions guide to sexuality, pleasure, and figuring it out. Let me remind you, this is aimed at children. The only thing that kids should be figuring out is how many hula hoops they can put on their fingers and whether the Lego fire station they've built is about to collapse.
You see, he's obviously been a bit flippant there, but it's a good point, isn't it? That, you know, when I was a child, these things just weren't an issue at all. And some of those very benign, innocent ways of being were automatically protected by default. And it seems that the line has been crossed. And the paradigm has been somewhat shifted, and definitely they shouldn't be thinking about sex in any other way than just for purpose of being prepared for puberty and knowledge of sexual reproduction in a biological sense. Let's just hear a bit more.
But the authors would rather offer 8-year-olds a guide to oral sex, an explanation of how two penis owners can have anal sex, and borderline pornographic cartoon drawings of two women scissoring, which even if the kids have left the room, I really don't fancy explaining.
So the concept of these things are nothing to do with biological sexual reproduction. They're to do with how two people in society may or may not choose to live their lives. And it's nothing to do with things that children need to know. It's also not something that everybody does. So it's not something which you can give an account to children as being the norm. And it just seems completely unnecessary. There doesn't seem to be an educational purpose behind it. And you know, on that point, it is worth saying that there's nothing which Mark says that suggests that this is on some recommended book list from the Department of Education. But equally so, there's nothing to say that teachers, if they so wish, could not bring this book into school and use it as part of their PSHE material. And certainly in the news, we can see that there are a number of different variations from one school to another of what one school thinks is okay and another school doesn't. And I think that's really where it's at. We need some standards and we need some things that are banned as well. Let's carry on.
There's also a nice bit of trans ideology thrown in there too, perpetuating the mythical and, in my view, dangerous idea that you've been born in the wrong body. That's a lie. That's medically impossible. But it doesn't stop the authors discussing gender identity labels, such as gender fluid, trans, and wait for it, brother boy, an Aboriginal who was presented as female at birth, but is a male spirit.
So Mark's going to just give you a few snapshots into the book now, but just based upon some of those things that are mentioned in the book, the different categories of people, as far as I'm aware, the role of a teacher is to teach fact and not indoctrinate about things which are absolutely contended in society at the moment. It seems like anything that comes into schools at the moment in PSHE particularly could be anything, whichever way the wind blows. But the real role of teachers surely is to teach things which are uncontested fact and not just the kind of gender ideology labels that the next person's come up with in the next week. So we're going to look inside the book now, I think.
Make it make sense. One of the co-authors said a mature 8-year-old could flick through it. Probably true, and suffer psychological damage as a result. Now, Tanya Carter, a spokeswoman for the Safe Schools Alliance, slammed the book as alarming. She said, why doesn't safeguarding apply to books? 8-year-olds need accurate information about puberty, but that's not what this book is. I completely agree. I think this utter tripe borders on grooming. It's normalising sex for very small children. I find it creepy. I find it sordid. I find it morally wrong. I find it damaging. I find it sick, and I find it perverted.
I mean, one thing I would say is thank God for people like Tanya and the Safe Schools Alliance. I'll pop the link to the Safe Schools Alliance in the description below. It's really very good that we have people like this looking out for what's happening in schools, because certainly the Department of Education are woefully behind on this, and it took a lot of lobbying from parents really just to get guidelines regarding gender ideology in schools. And to make sure that these things like the possibility of being born in the wrong body was absolutely outlawed and banned in schools. But still, it's not against the law to do so. It's just in guidelines which have been put out by the Department of Education. So I think the reason that these things are sick and perverted coming into school is because there is no checks and balances in place. One of the things that's important to note is that in 2020, a law was passed under the Child and Social Care Act that requires every child up to the age of 13 to have received relationships education. But there is no guidelines, and nor is there any curriculum, because it's not actually being delivered under the Education Act. Let's hear a bit more.
And sadly, this kind of filth is not unusual, it's not surprising, it's not new. We've had to put up with hypersexualised drag acts, pumping and gyrating and wagging their backside around in front of toddlers. Canada witnessed the spectacle of a woodwork teacher, obviously male, wearing gigantic, enormous prosthetic breasts. If you don't think that he's getting a sexual kick out of making his pupils look at that rack of his, then you need to get out more.
You see, some of these things you just couldn't come up with, you couldn't make them up. I think people sometimes look on and they have a basic trust in the education system and believe that that trust is founded. But the truth is that trust is currently being breached. So, listen, I'm going to put the link to this article from Mark Dolan from GB News down in the description. And it goes on for a couple of minutes longer, but basically tells you some of the content in this book. And you should probably go and have a look and see for yourself. But one of the things that's important to me as the candidate for reform in Spen Valley is that we look very carefully about the dangers of gender ideology as purported in schools and the over-sexualisation of children. I have a little boy, he's 8 years old, and I have had these discussions with the leaders in his school already. It's not something which is somewhere down in London or an extreme school somewhere else. It's in our neighbourhoods. But I'd really like to know what you think. And the Spen Valley team have put together a survey, and we'd like to find out what you think about these things. There are questions about gender ideology in schools on that survey. So you can either scan the QR code that will pop up in the video just now, or you can find the description link to the survey as well. So go and have a look. Definitely fill out our survey because I'd like to know what you think. Thanks very much.